Hi, I'm Dee Teddick, and in this video I'll be talking about the process of doing an analysis of text. There is a PowerPoint presentation that accompanies this, and it is on the Cobalt website along with this video, so please do open that up or print that out so that you can follow along as I explain this process. So texts, be they written or oral, really form the foundation of content-based instruction, whether that's in a regular foreign language context or language across the curriculum or immersion teaching. Any type of written text, books, websites, official documents, maps, blogs, etc., or oral texts such as radio broadcasts, tape recordings, DVDs, etc. This really forms the foundation of the input that your students receive in content-based instruction. When possible, you should plan to incorporate a range of different texts in any particular curriculum unit that you're planning for content-based instruction, so that you're exposing your students to a wide variety of genres. Fewer readings really should be guiding you in your unit development for content-based instruction. And they should be selected really carefully. When you select readings that are really great for content-based instruction, you want to make sure that you're maximizing their use. So you select readings that could potentially be used in a number of different units that lend themselves to various themes, or that can be revisited for various purposes, different purposes. Because once you find a really great text, you really want to make sure that you're using it as much as you can, and in as many different ways as you can. I've got the PowerPoint over here to my right, which is why I keep looking over here. So I am now on slide 3, so that you're following along here. One of the things to keep in mind is that you have to select texts very carefully when you're selecting them for second language learners who are learning through content. So when you start looking for a text or texts to go along with a curriculum unit that you're planning, ask yourself a variety of questions, such as, is this text type or is this genre one that my students have familiarity with? How might it differ from texts in the same type of genre that students get in their first language? How does this text fit into the curriculum unit? In how many ways am I going to be able to use it? Can I use it for different purposes? Can I use it in a range of units? Is there cultural information in the text that may not be familiar to students? Does this text have special features to really scaffold the reading process for these second language readers? And those are things like graphics, pictures, really clear organization, a glossary or glossed words in the text, very logical organization, text features like bold-face type to highlight something that's really important, etc. Are there any special features that might lead to misinterpretation of meaning? And how challenging is the language of the text? How tough is that vocabulary? Is it super technical? Is it vocabulary that students may already be familiar with? And what about the grammatical components of the text as well? What is sentence length like? How complex is the text grammatically, etc.? For selecting texts for an immersion context, Nancy Cloud and her colleagues, Fred Genesee and Els Hamayan, have suggested that the following be considered when you're choosing materials. Proficiency demands. You want to make sure that you're choosing a text that is either at the student's level or slightly above the student's level, but not so challenging for them that they wouldn't be able to handle that text at all. Whether it's being read to them orally or whether they are reading it themselves. You want to make sure that they already know some of the vocabulary in that text. especially the core vocabulary would be really important, but you may have to teach them some of the content-specific vocabulary that's being introduced. For Spanish speakers, you might want to look at the variety of Spanish that is used and make sure that it is a variety of Spanish that's going to be consistent for the learner, or something that they're going to be really familiar with. That would be the same for English, for example, and other languages as well. Secondly, they talk about contextual support, and I was just talking about this in the previous slide. Things like illustrations, graphics, logical organization, text features like boldface, italics, etc. Language authenticity, I really like this one, that the language is natural and predictable. One of the things that we know is when text is written specifically for second language learners and it's changed to be more grammatically simple, or to provide vocabulary that's easier for students, what you find is that it often reads in a very contrived way. It is in a very natural text. So whenever possible, make sure that you're providing your students with natural text that is predictable, that has a level of formality that's going to be appropriate for the learners as well. Consider the intended audience. Is this text appropriate for the cognitive level of learner that you are working with? Are the illustrations in the text inclusive in terms of representing the diversity of student classrooms and various experiences in their community? Is the text gender specific or gender fair? So pay attention to those types of features in a text so that you're choosing a text that's going to be a really good text and one that you can use again and again. What about some cultural features? Those would be things that related to students' background knowledge and whether or not they're able to understand some cultural aspects. Now, that's not to say that you can't choose a text that isn't completely familiar to students culturally, because those are some things that you can teach teach around. But it is something that you should consider and keep in mind. You also want to make sure that whenever possible the texts are honoring and valuing the cultures of the students in your classroom and in the school community or the community at large. And then finally, you want to make sure that the text has intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional satisfaction. You want it to be really good text. That stories, if it's a narrative, are powerful and they have imaginative content. It's going to be, this is text that's well written, it's going to engage learners, and text has a clear purpose. So those are some features that have been recommended, that I primarily for the immersion context, but I really think that they're great pieces of advice for other contexts as well. Now, Gibbons, this is Pauline Gibbons, who does a lot of work with English language learners in Australia, but has many terrific tips for children and adolescents who are learning another language. She identifies various things that you should keep in mind when you're selecting texts for children who are learning to read. So these emergent readers are very early readers. She identifies features such as repetitive language, so thinking about those stories that build over time, like the Little Red Hen, things that just keep popping back up in the text, right? Or a repetitive event that builds up into a cumulative story, and there are so many children's stories that we can think of that go along with that. Stories that have universal themes, such as good versus evil, illustrations that really represent the meaning in the text to help the readers. One of the things that's challenging, sometimes you find really beautiful texts that have these phenomenal illustrations, but sometimes they're so abstract they really don't serve as a very good aid to learners. These early readers rely a lot on pictures to understand the meaning of text as they're beginning to learn how to read. So you want to make sure that the illustrations are clear and that they go along with the meaning that is being communicated on a page. You want to make sure that the print is clear, that it's well laid out. There isn't so much stuff on a page that it's really going to distract children who are still learning about exactly where they need to put their attention. You want, again, good, authentic language that is not contrived. Content and language that can be bridged for learners, that is, that might be a little bit above their level, but that with proper scaffolding they can have access to. And content and language that extends children's knowledge about reading and about the world. Gibbons has this terrific quote that I think that we all need to keep in mind when we're talking about reading for children, that language is actually learned through reading. That it is not, that language isn't simply a prerequisite for reading, it's actually also learned through reading. And I think we really need to keep that in mind, particularly when we're thinking about second language learners, because if we believe that we only can choose text that children have all of the knowledge of, they know all of that language, then how does that serve as an opportunity for them to learn through that text? Again, just like Cloud and her colleagues, Gibbons recommends that the content be interesting and enjoyable for children to read. Gibbons also has some terrific ideas for selecting text for older readers who are perhaps reading chapter books or lengthier texts. That you take into account several features when you're choosing those texts as well. They should have a clear overall text structure, clear signaling devices like titles, headings, subheadings, maybe clear topic sentences, the way that the text holds together, good cohesion of a text. It should have appropriate conceptual density. You don't want it to be too far beyond what the learners are able to handle. And it should also have really good instructional devices built into the text, such as a really well-organized table of contents, a glossary, an index, graphic overviews, diagrams, summaries. It's so terrific when you see these chapter books that are written for children where at the beginning it sort of lays out what's coming in this chapter and maybe has some guiding questions for the learners to consider, and then at the end there's a summary. And sometimes it's a great reading strategy to read the summary first, so that you have developed a bit of what the psychologists have called an advanced organizer. This sort of basic understanding of what something's going to be about, so that you're in a better position to be able to predict as you read that new text. Now, Tara Fortune and I developed a text analysis form. These are all of the things that I've been talking about already, the things that you should consider when selecting a text are all really terrific. But once you've selected a text, it's really important to have a systematic way to analyze it so that you can really mine it. You're going to know that text. You're going to know its content in and out. You're going to be able to figure out whether or not there are cultural features that are going to trip up your students. You're going to be able to do a very close analysis of the language features of the text. Clearly, we would not expect teachers to do a text analysis, a detailed text analysis for every text that you choose for a curriculum unit. That absolutely would not be realistic. But if you go through the process once, to really go through and in a very detailed way analyze a text, you will find that that will teach you how to have a particular eye, so that when you encounter texts later, even though you're not doing a detailed analysis, there are things that you're going to be looking for that can help you in your planning of lessons for that particular text. So at any rate, this form was developed by Tara and me and revised over the years as we've been using it with teachers. It is available on the Cobalt website, And in the PowerPoint, there's a link to the particular page where the form is available. It's available in a PDF version that would be really good for printing out and then just having it if you wanted to share it with colleagues or something. But there's also a Word version on the site that you can actually use to just type in if you're actually doing a text analysis, either as an assignment for a class or because you think that this is something that you would like to do on your own. The Cobalt site also provides examples of completed text analyses, and in some cases the text is actually available so that you can see the text and then also see how particular teachers analyzed that text. One of the ones that's up there is based on the story of the very hungry caterpillar. And while the text isn't made available, it's a story that many elementary teachers and others are familiar with, and so the text analysis is provided for you. Unfortunately, with the Spanish example that's on the site, the text, we're having trouble finding the text again. It was a link that has since disappeared, but it still may be helpful for you to take a look at the analysis itself. So the components of the form, the text analysis form, are as follows. Context, and that would be things such as the theme that you've selected for a curriculum unit, the title or full citation of the text that you're analyzing, the grade level of the learners that are being taught or that this text is really intended for, and then the student's estimated language proficiency level. Then content, culture, genre, possible instructional activities and learning strategies, and language, both vocabulary and grammatical structures. I'm going to be talking in more depth about each of these in turn. So first with the context, you want to identify that theme, or going along with Wiggins and McTighe, their understanding by design framework. It might be a big idea that is conceptualized for organizing this curriculum unit. And this is a curriculum unit that this particular text that you're analyzing is going to be used in. And then, of course, it's helpful to provide the complete bibliographic citation of the text, identify the grade level, and then estimated proficiency level of the students, but using standard descriptors. So, for example, the ACTFL guidelines or the ACTFL performance guidelines that many of you have access to and are easily found at the ACTFL site itself. One thing that I will say is that this form was developed for written texts, but you may find it helpful as well for oral texts if you wanted to analyze something like the lyrics of a song. Or an excerpt from a DVD, for example. Some of the components are going to be more applicable than others, but it's still an interesting framework for you to use for that purpose as well. Okay, so the first component is content. And this gives you an opportunity to really identify the key content in this particular text. And what we've used in this text analysis form is the hierarchy of knowledge, which is described by Cuser and colleagues in a 1995 text called Curricular Conversations. I actually have a copy of the text here. It's a really terrific book for those of you who might be interested for curriculum development for K-8 context. At any rate, as you can see on the slide, and this is slide number 10, at the very bottom of this pyramid diagram that you see are facts. And the facts are the specific information in a particular text, but it's at the lowest level of abstraction. So I'm going to be using here in this example the very hungry caterpillar. So many of you might remember that story where there is, it starts with a little egg that's on a leaf, and then this caterpillar hatches out of the egg and realizes that it's very hungry, and it sets out, and each day it eats something different, but it's always hungry, and so it just keeps eating and eating and eating, and after a whole week it gets a really bad of eating and not eating particularly healthy things. It gets a really bad stomach ache, and then you know the storyline. So at any rate, those are the facts of the story. And then the next level up, when you're considering this hierarchy of knowledge, is the level of concepts. And concepts refer to the words or phrases, the abstract thoughts. Maybe they can be concrete as well. But these are thoughts or concepts that have emerged from the facts themselves. They're at a higher level of abstraction. So, for example, again, going along with that very hungry caterpillar, some concepts related to this story are things such as growth and change, life cycles, stages, metamorphosis. These are a number of things that emerge, bigger concepts that you would want your students to learn as well as they are reading a text like this. So that if you only looked at the story from the fact angle, the children would only develop sort of this idea, this sense that this is a really cute little story. But obviously you want them to walk away with some deeper understandings, and that's where the concepts come in and where the generalizations come in. Now the generalizations are at the highest level of abstraction. Typically generalizations and actually concepts as well don't really appear in the text. Certainly in children's books, the concepts might appear overtly in more advanced texts for more advanced learners, such as democracy, for example, if they're reading a social studies text. Or the notion of self-esteem might be mentioned in a text or may not be. But the generalizations are typically these life lessons, these lessons that you want your students to walk away with after they've had an opportunity to work with this text. Again, you're not going to find these in the text itself. This is an opportunity for you to step back from the text and say, okay, what are some of the big ideas, or the enduring understandings is a better way of putting it. What are some of the enduring understandings, using Wiggins and McTighe language, that I want my students to be able to learn and carry forward with them at the end of this unit. So again, along with that very hungry caterpillar example, things like change is a part of life. All living organisms change. Living organisms grow in different ways. And growing organisms have certain needs and different needs. So these are examples of generalizations, or these enduring understandings that you want to have your children or the students get from having read the text and having participated in activities in a unit around this particular text. So that is the content component of the text analysis. The next component is culture, and the emphasis in the cultural portion is really on unfamiliar cultural concepts, or concepts that might be familiar but used in a new way, so therefore unfamiliar. And in order to consider this part of the analysis, we looked to the ACTFL national standards and their framework for cultural knowledge. They identify 3 different things: cultural products, and those are creations of a particular culture. They may be tangible or intangible. So for example, some examples of tangible products would be paintings, a piece of literature, a cathedral, a pair of chopsticks. Intangible would be things like an oral story that's only shared orally within a particular culture, a dance, a sacred ritual, a system of laws. So that gives you an understanding of what the products are. And then cultural practices are what we do, how we interact with one another, in our social interactions, what our behaviors are. So what behaviors go along with using chopsticks, for example, or what behaviors do we use when we use eating utensils, whatever they happen to be in a particular culture. And then, most importantly, but often ignored, is cultural perspectives. And that is the meanings, the attitudes, the values, the beliefs that underlie the products and the practices of a particular culture. This is really a terrific way of thinking about culture, a really rather concrete way and meaningful way. There is a scaffold that I developed that provides lots of examples of practices, products, and perspectives, and then shows the relationship among them. And that scaffold is also made available for you in a PDF file that's provided along with this video and the PowerPoint. So I hope you find that useful. The next component of the text analysis is genre, and that of course refers to the organization of the particular text that you have selected. The purpose of the text, what was it written for, who's the intended audience, the text structure and its discourse features, how is it organized, and it's the linguistic features that are related to a particular genre. So another scaffold was developed, and this was actually developed by Tara Fortune and myself based on Pauline Gibbons' work again, and in a group headed by Love in Australia, where they identified 6 prototypical written text types. This scaffold, again, is available at the Cobalt site along with this video and the PowerPoint. So, for example, the text types that they identify are narrative, that's a story, and the purpose is typically to entertain. A recount, such as what I did during my summer vacation, and that's to tell what happened or to reconstruct a chronologically ordered sequence of events. Instructions or procedure, such as how to ride a bike, appliance manuals, rule books, etc. And the purpose is to tell how to do something. Then a report, such as a student doing a report about dolphins in class. Explanations, such as describing the water cycle or the process of metamorphosis. And discussion or argument. And then what this scaffold does, as you can see if you have downloaded it already, is to provide you with the core structural features that are associated with this particular genre, and then some of the key linguistic features that are likely to emerge when you have a text that is within this particular genre. It's a terrific scaffold, and it's really helpful to figure out the genre and the linguistic features of the text based on a particular genre before you move on and start planning activities for the text. And speaking of activities for the text, the next component of the text analysis form is an opportunity for you to brainstorm possible instructional activities and learning strategies that you might teach as you're using this text in the classroom. The learning strategies are specific strategies that kids learn to become better learners and to aid them in learning. So, for example, reading strategies are things like being able to predict what's coming next, being able to use the context to try to figure out the meaning of an unknown word, to be able to identify main ideas and supporting details. There are many learning strategies and reading strategies that have been developed. And what we know in content-based instruction and in immersion classrooms is that students have to be taught these strategies overtly. They will not learn, most children will not learn these on their own. They need to be developed overtly. And when you're teaching a text, you should always make sure that you're attending to at least one learning strategy that you're really trying to focus on and emphasize as you're working on a particular text. At the Cobalt website, you'll find under the instructional strategies to support content-based instruction, this is one of the modules, you'll find using learning strategies as one of the pieces that you can read, and there are terrific links to lists of learning strategies that correspond to different subject matter areas, etc. So I really highly recommend that you take a look at that as you're working on your text analysis. And then also this portion of the text analysis has you design activities in 3 stages: the pre, during, and post phases, lesson phases, so that you are preparing students for the text, and then the main activity is the during the reading or the focused learning activity, and then after the students have read, how are they applying the knowledge of what they, the knowledge that they've gained from reading this text in some new way. So also you will find this using learning phases as one of the instructional strategies identified at the Cobalt site, and you will get a list of the instructional strategies along with their features. What it is that, why do we have pre-reading activities, and what are those activities intended to do? This is how all of the lessons are organized in the Cobalt unit, or in the Cobalt website, the model lessons and units that you have access to, and this is how content-based lessons should be developed. So even at the university level, if you're teaching in language across the curriculum contexts, your learners will benefit from having lessons that are organized in this way, that prepare them for the main content, especially if that's developed through text, and then focuses on the main content of the text, and then follows up in some way. It's really an example of good teaching, and is a really great way to think about your text. And what's great about this is that this part of the analysis form gets you thinking about how you might use this text, and how it's going to be really helpful to you in your classroom. And this, we have found that this is teachers' most favorite part of the analysis form to fill out, because teachers are always so great at thinking about really creative ways to teach their learners. Okay, and the last component of the text analysis form is language, and this is where you have an opportunity to really mine that text, to really sit down and do a very close analysis of the language that's used in that text, so that you can be better prepared to teach your learners what they need to know to be able to access the language in that text. So the first part under language is vocabulary, words, phrases, idioms, chunks of language, that where children don't learn the individual words, they actually learn it as a chunk. And I'm thinking about The Very Hungry Caterpillar again, that story where at the end of every day after he's eaten, he always says, but he's still hungry. He's still hungry, and in Spanish, pero todavía tenía hambre. And so even though he ate and ate and ate, he still was hungry. And that same line, whatever it is actually in the English version of the text, appears again and again and again. So children learn that as a chunk, if you will. So there are 2 sections where you should be filling out for the vocabulary. First of all, the essential vocabulary for learning the content. What key vocabulary words do they need to know to understand and access the main content of this text? And then select vocabulary. This might be vocabulary they've already learned that they would be reviewing, or vocabulary you may want to teach in the future that they would preview, and it might be vocabulary that is related to the activities that you developed in relationship to the text. So one of the things to notice on this text analysis form is for the essential vocabulary, we have the initials CO next to it. And for the select vocabulary, we have the initials CC. CO stands for content obligatory. And this is important because it corresponds to writing language objectives in lesson plans. and this is described at length elsewhere, but you will find that in the Cobalt lessons on this site, the language objectives are written in those two categories: content obligatory and content compatible. And so that's what those initials stand for. And then finally, after the vocabulary is identified, you want to identify the actual language, the functions and the grammatical structures. So a language function means that it's what we do with language. And we have both communicative functions and academic functions. So an example of a communicative function would be apologizing, or greeting someone, or describing something to someone that was non-cognitively demanding. Whereas an academic function might be summarizing or synthesizing. And the functions you will find in the component of the text analysis that relates to the instructional activities that you have identified. What functions, what will students need to be able to do with language to be able to carry out those activities? You'll also find some functions embedded in the text at times as well. And then grammatical structures. What grammatical structures do students need to be able to understand the content of the text and to be able to carry out some of the activities that you've identified? So again, this is organized in terms of essential and select, just like the vocabulary, to correspond to content obligatory and content compatible. I think many of these issues will become much more understandable to you when you look at the examples of the text analyses that are available at the Cobalt site. So there is a list of functions that I developed using some resources, the Shimo and O'Malley, Finocchiaro and Brumfitt, O'Malley and Valdez-Pierce. And so this list of functions is also available for you as a scaffold. If you're trying to, sometimes we're so far removed from learning a language ourselves that we don't remember the grammatical terminology for various grammatical structures of a particular language. And so one scaffold that you might find helpful is the index of a grammar book. So if you still have grammar books, those of you teaching in English, you might still have grammar books and could use an index, or those of you who learn Spanish, you might find an index of a Spanish grammar book to be really helpful as well. And this is just to give you the actual language that you need: prepositions, adjectives, demonstratives, superlatives, etc. These are all grammatical terms that should be helpful to you when you're identifying the actual language that students are that might be challenging for students in this particular text. So that is the explanation of the text analysis form and how you might be able to use it. And again, I urge you to take a look at the examples. It's always really helpful to look at an example as you're filling something out, and use the scaffolds that have been developed for you, because I think that they will be very helpful for you. I hope that you find the text analysis to be a useful and valuable tool for you. That is the feedback that I've consistently gotten from teachers, that it's initially the thought of doing this is a very challenging thought, but the teachers learn a lot about text in the process of doing a detailed analysis. So enjoy, and thanks for viewing this and for visiting the Cobalt site.